right, so since 2010, if in the top of your head or mind, whatever that is, you could pick 10 schools who had the most, we're going to do this before you put the image up. Let's see if we can get close. The 10 schools who have the most unanimous All-Americans in college football since 2010. Paul, you take a couple of teams.
I'm going to say Alabama.
2. Give me 2 teams.
And Ohio State.
Okay, Craig?
Oklahoma and Clemson.
All right.
Since when is this?
2010.
Okay, yeah, I still feel good.
I don't know if this is right. I'm going to say LSU.
Well, 2019 alone.
Well, yeah, they had 19 of them. 19 unanimous. So I'm going to say LSU. Let me see. And I'm going to like throw a wild card out there and say like Wisconsin, just because of the offensive linemen and linebackers. I'm sure that's not even close. All right, here's the list of 10. Alabama with 23. Ohio State with 9. Iowa and Georgia with 7. LSU probably all in the same year with 6. Look who's at 5.
Hey, look who I want you to look. Look who I wrote down.
Baylor. No, that's Baylor's it right there on that list. Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Florida State, and then there's Stanford with what they have, and of course probably more towards the 2010 than maybe 2018 or so. But those, leave that up for a little bit, Garrett, and look at that list at Alabama way out in front. That's not a surprise.
No, it's not. I thought there might be more Georgia in the last couple of years than 7, but Iowa doesn't surprise me. They always get every other year there's some kind of super stud line, like Jack Campbell from this last year. There's always a guy like that there. Ohio State's a little lower than I thought it would have been.
They're number 2.
I mean, number overall, 23 to, the only 9 there at Ohio State. Like all the ones at 5 on down the list may even come out of like one. I know Baylor's didn't, but FSU's might have come mostly out of 2013, and LSU's might have come mostly out of 2019.
Yeah, so I went 0 for 2. Surprised to not see either Oklahoma or Clemson on there, but I guess, unanimous All-American is a hard feat to achieve. So, no surprise that Bama's on top. Ohio State's like the easy other, 1B default answer, I think, for most categories like this. Soon enough, Georgia will be, the 1 seed of that, and it may already be 1B in so many ways. But, yeah, surprising to see Baylor on there. It is. They've had, a Jalen Petrie and a guy like that, but I'm trying to think of, I guess since 2010, that lets you have Corey Coleman and guys like that too. So, yeah, that 2010 part is the caveat there that kind of changes,
Who would be the 5? You mentioned Coleman, you mentioned Petrie.
Drango.
James Lynch.
Possibility.
Unanimous, maybe, yeah. And who would be Xavier Howard didn't get very much credit at all when he was in college. Golly.
Would it be another wide receiver?
Would it be Billings?
No. I don't think he was unanimous All-American. I don't even know if he was All-American.
It's a good name, though.
No, that's a good guess. I don't know. I had to sit and think about it. Maybe James Lynch. I'm not sure. Sean Okerman, was he unanimous All-American? I don't think so. No. I don't know. I don't know who that would be. But, that's impressive. I think that's the thing, though, they've got to be wary of when you're talking about the new Big 12 and all this jazz about who's in, who's out, who's going to be on top. Baylor, in particular, hasn't really been able to grab momentum and run with it ever in their entire existence. They're good, and then scandal happens and Browse is fired. Take a couple years to get good again. They play Oklahoma. And if not for Chris Platt being run down in an incredibly athletic play by OU's defense, then maybe they win a title with Rule. Then they went and ran into the soon-to-be juggernaut that was Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. But, he got them back to that point. They played for a Big 12 title and lost in a close game, played in the Sugar Bowl. Then he leaves. It's back to square one again. And then Aranda by year 2, he's got them there. And now Aranda's actually sticking around, and it appears he could stick around for the long while. But because of the way the last year's gone, you're like, yeah, but if he's going to do that, they need to be better than what we saw last year. So, they're filled with potential, but they've just never hit on the coach and the timing and all that to where it could last for much longer than, a couple of years. And I think Browse and those teams were going to be the exception to that. They were on a run. They were on a five-year run, and there was going to be a 10 or 15-year run. I have no doubts in my mind about that. But as we know, didn't have all their ducks in a row and all their business taken care of on and off the field. And your thoughts or whatever can be on that, but there's the potential there for sure.
Terrence Williams.
Yes, Levi just sent this.
Terrence Williams. Cyril Richardson.
Okay.
Offensive lineman. Levi did. Okay, good. Corey Coleman, you mentioned him. James Lynch is on that list.
And Drango.
And Spencer Drango, I think, twice. May have been.
When he did the post-game show with me, people asked me if he was my son.
Perhaps
his son or brother.
Perhaps not the biggest recruit that Baylor had in that run where they were really good from 2010 until whenever, but because RG3 and flipping from Houston when Browse left Houston, but probably as big a name as they've had who committed to them along with Katie Cannon and a couple of others since in the last 10 or 12 years. So that's a nice number for Baylor, and I was surprised that Clemson or Oklahoma did not have somebody on there. Wisconsin just kind of like Iowa. They just have a lot of linemen or defensive players that seem to be at that All-American level.
Yeah, and what I was trying to get at is that you've got TCU now who's in the driver's seat to be really good for a long time, just based on their setup. I know Texas Tech feels like they're getting there. Proof will be in the pudding this year, as far as how both those teams perform. But I think you've got to have Baylor in there. I think Oklahoma State has every right to feel like they are one of those teams. And, if not for that magical play at the goal line with Jaron McVay, they were Big 12 champs 2 years ago. And the whole narrative around them, is Spencer Sanders still around? Or, a lot could have been different based on a couple of inches, really. I think we kind of just forget about Oklahoma State sometimes, or just – I don't know. We don't prop them up like we do other teams.
And they've had more consistency than anybody else in the conference, perhaps other than Oklahoma, for the last 2 decades.
And so there's those 4 right there that I think are all great candidates. I don't think there's going to be a dominant team there. There wasn't Oklahoma was dominant, but besides that, that's the only example of somebody just running through the Big 12. Granted, it's not a 100-year history like, some others may have a decades worth of proof in the pudding, but yeah, I think it's going to be a free for all, and I think all those teams that I just mentioned all have big reasons why they believe they can be a part of that mix. But then there's a lot of others. K-State needs to be in that mix. They just won it last year, so there's 5 teams that are going to be contenders, I think, in most years, and there's several others that could. Utah obviously is going to be a part of that at one point. BYU feels like they can be. UCF feels like they can be. It's going to be fun to check back in about a decade, hope God willing, and look at what actually took place, because it's a free for all, I think, in so many ways, this new conference.
You know what I'm going to miss about the Big 12 though in football? I really am, and it's never going to be this way again. Is that everybody played everybody every year, so you didn't get a break with the schedule based on maybe one team's up or 2 teams are down or whatever. Is that everybody was going to play everybody, and I think that's also why it was so competitive, no matter how many times Oklahoma won it. And then we've seen what's changed over the last 4 to 7 years. Alabama has the most ever unanimous All-Americans with 41. Ohio State with 37. The top 5 is Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and then Southern Cal. This is 365 Sports.